Pastoral care and the biblical tradition are also inextricably linked in the minds of both Jews and Christians, for whom a central task of human life is to become whole. And it is clear from the earliest texts in the Bible that this wholeness that they speak about is relational. We've talked about this yesterday in our class, and some of the information which I sent out to you in these articles illustrate a kind of fundamental shift that's been taking place within the world of pastoral care and counseling and even psychology. This myth of the isolated man, self-autonomous, self-fulfilled, self-actualized, independent, which has dominated Western thought and Western psychology, has been so overturned by welcoming in the experience of other people. And particularly, this began with women who said, that's not what this is not my story. And then other ethnicities, this is not my story. This is not my story. Which meant that now we are beginning to listen to each other's stories, not under the judgment of a hyper-myth, but to welcome each person's experience as their experience. Now that is clearly present in the beginning of the biblical narrative in Genesis. I think about this tower that's knocked down, this attempt of human beings to build something together, to do something so extraordinary that they could finally be a real community. That's their fear. We should do this, they say, lest we be scattered. Genesis 11. That's the fear in us. That's deep primal fear, that we are separated. And in the midst of that separation, what can we do to heal that? Well, we'll do something big. We'll make an empire. Or we'll all have the same language, or something. We'll all think the same thing. And so, and in the midst of that, Yahweh, you remember the story, comes down, and down goes the tower. And he mumbles up, he confuses their speech, which makes it all but impossible to do something that big, we think, And it's extraordinarily frustrating because it feels like the very thing they feared was what was happening. That they were scattered. That's what happens. You're scattered. They scattered them across. So how are we going to be together? How are we going to build relationship when our language is different? When our origins are different? It seems to me that this very early story recognizes that diversity is deeply embedded in creation itself. So if we don't speak the same language, or even if we do speak the same language, we know that we don't always use our words in the same way. One of the leading scholars in my life, Franz Rosenzweig, said, all relation is translation. So how do we do that? How do we start the process of building a community when in fact we're so different? How do we honor the differences and at the same time talk about our unity? What do you think? Yeah?
Value each other's stories.
Value each other's story. How do we value somebody else's story?
Listen.
We
Listen to it.
we listen to it. We listen to it. I mean, that's it. Henry Nouwen speaks about this so much. When we listen, when we pay attention, we worth the other into being. You're worth my attention. I'm giving you my full presence. I want to hear what it's like to be you. And you know this, as I know this, on the receiving end. When somebody really wants to listen to me, it's like, really? You want to hear all of it? Well, maybe not all of it. Yeah, all of it. So from this early moment in this biblical sense of what human life is, both personally and communally, there is this recognition of the uniqueness of each individual life, of the communities that grow in them, and the requirement for us to listen. Reading the text means caring for the whole person. And I just want to say a sidelight from my own tradition, because this notion of reading the text and listening carefully is deeply embedded in what we know in the covenant as historic pietism. Pietism. And I feels for me so helpful to feel those roots go down deep. It's certainly not just a covenant thing. This is a part of all of our biblical traditions. But in particular, it was of utmost importance for ours, partly because pietism grew out in the 17th century in Europe out of the horrific religious wars, the 30 Years' War. I mean, Europe was decimated because Catholic was killing Lutheran, and Lutheran was killing and the Calvinists, this was a major 30 years. If we talk about the Shia and Sunni thing in the Mideast, and we go, how can they do this? Aren't they the same people? And we have our own heritage of this for a long time. We understand this. If we touch that part of our own history, we can weep and mourn and understand, and not look self-righteously at what other people are now going through, and pray for peace and for trying to find ways to end that conflict. But for a whole group of people in Europe in the midst of this, there were abandoned orphans and widows, there were sick, there was disease, and they responded to this by starting to gather into small groups and read the Bible. Lay people reading the Bible. Hey. Really, it's an enormous trust. But you could also feel the enormous yearning of these people to connect with this word, which they have been told was so central to their life, but was usually proclaimed in Latin from the pulpit. But now they were reading it together. And as they were reading it, what was stirred up in them was to respond to the condition of their time. And so they built orphanages, and they raised money for the widows. Where's this text? Can you hear it? This is Amos, this is Isaiah, this is Micah. What does the Lord require? Take care of the widows and the orphans. It's not confusing, it's right there. And so they're reading it, and they're watching their Lord and reading these stories of Jesus, then talking about the cup of cold water. So they did this. And they nurtured that doing by reading together. Somehow in the mystery and sovereignty of the Spirit, those seeds floated up into the winds, which brought them all over the world, but also to our little rocky soil in Sweden, which is where my roots are. There is one of the people that is at the heart of our story is a woman we know as Moivald, Mother of the Vale, Mother of the Valley. Carl New's daughter. She was in an abusive relationship, and yet was stirred in the heart by the winds of change and renewal in the countryside. She was a peasant. She found other women who were also stirred up and wanting to meet. So they began to meet. There are stories about her father trying to bind her to a chair to keep her, or her husband to bind her from a chair to keep her from going, But she'd go. And they'd meet, and these women would meet, and they would start to read. Nobody was orchestrating this. Nobody directing it. They began to read. And what were they reading? The same thing the pastors were reading in the Gospels, in these deep narratives. And they felt that to respond to their own time, their eyes were open to the condition of children in their midst. This was nearly a feudal society. Kids were indentured as children to estates. My grandfather was on an estate. His father was indentured, and his job was to open the gate to let people come through the estate and then pay a little poll tax. That's where he came from. Well, what they did was, what are you going to do about this system? These are women. This is an entrenched powerful and abusive system. So they started sewing things, clothes, all sorts of things. And then they sold them in the marketplace. And they took the money and they went to the auction block and they bought the kids off the auction block and brought them to a school that they built, but they taught them how to read. Readers. Lasa, we were called derisively by people. Read. And of course, with reading, not just text, but reading, I mean, it opened up an entirely new world for these children who otherwise would have been stuck. Slave laborers. I go back to that kind of core narrative in my life and am astonished at what can be accomplished by faithful readers. As it turns out, Moaval's grandson was David Neville, who was president of this college some time back. The president, her son of this peasant woman, became president of North Park. One more piece of personal information, and then I won't talk about myself anymore. My grandfather knew this David Neville when he first came to the seminary. He came to the seminary after he had participated in World War I. My grandfather ended up teaching homiletics here. He was actually dean from 1949 to 1961. When he was done with deaning, he went down and started a church with his wife down in Florida. I always thought of him to be extremely self-assured. But in fact, he was often filled with intense anxiety. But he was like most Swedes. He hid it pretty well. You know? It's part of this myth of the man. Don't show this. Don't talk about this. So this anxiety really grew and intensified in the war, where he was fighting in the trenches in the Argonne forests, took shrapnel in the leg, watched many of his buddies blown apart, saw the depths of what human violence and darkness can do in this horrific moment of history. I mean, he was right in there. What happens to faith? What happens to emotional stability with a sense of what's up and what's down? When we find ourselves doing things we never imagined we could do. When we see our own friends lost in this horrible, wasted carnage. Well, he came back, of course, to California, and he was so stirred up he couldn't sit still. Now, we would call this perhaps anxiety. It is anxiety. But he came to seminary to try to sort it out, which is what people used to do in those days. You know, I don't know what's going on with my life. Maybe I'll go to the monastery or seminary and try to figure it out. But in fact, the anxiety continued. Somebody told him, according to the most recent medical information, then that anxiety was really the source. The source of anxiety was sensitive teeth. Remember this? You ever hear about this? Sensitive teeth. So he was encouraged to have his teeth pulled. He's a young man, which he did. He followed practice. But it was not effective. His anxiety continued to be there. So he began to take long walks in the woods. And the woods I'm talking about are where the old tuberculosis sanitarium used to be up at Pulaski and Bryn Mawr. Long walks. I'll come back to woods at some point later in the day, because there's no doubt that the walks in the woods were also important. But while he was walking in the woods, he read out loud the Gospel of John over and over and over and over, and walking and reading John until he memorized almost all of it. And I'm saying this speaking because this is how he spoke, this is how he talks about it. He wasn't reading it and keeping it in his head. He was speaking it and hearing it. So important. And his anxiety began to lessen. A therapist might say, well, that's a good distraction. You should go out for a long walk, get a little exercise, and get a distraction. Get your mind off the trenches. But I think what happened there, and I wish I had enough in me at that point to ask him about this, but I'm pretty convinced that what happened was that he brought his own suffering. He brought his own suffering to the one who suffered. He developed an intense personal relationship with that suffering and that suffering one, who also ended life in the hands of violent and frightened, terrified and powerful men, and who transformed suffering into new life, and who therefore helped transfer his suffering, his pain, his anguish and experience into new life. That's the healing capacity of the text. He's not reading commentaries. He's not talking about it. He's reading it over and over. You can't just tell someone the story. It requires reading, and a particular kind of reading. Not like reading other books that we do sometimes, or nonfiction, or coursework, but reading in a way that engages ourselves fully and completely, open to it, surprised by it. In his book, Images in Covenant Beginnings, my grandfather, Eric Hawkinson, by the way, I was just kind of blown away when I looked at it the other day and looked at the opening page. This was published in 1968, and I'm about the same age that he was when he published it. He describes this relationship between these peasants who are derisively called readers in this way. The Bible was in their hands and used faithfully. Nor should we forget that this was largely a lay movement. There was no thought but that the common man and woman could understand what was necessary for their salvation and the nurture of her life, that this was found in the Bible. There's no question. Personal and family devotions were common. They spoke of themselves frequently as gathering around the Word, as if to encircle it like gathering around a campfire on a cold day or a dark night. The readers did not come to the Bible because they had been convinced by theological and dogmatic discussions of its inerrancy or infallibility. They came and continued to come because they found life and inspiration for themselves. They knew that speaking about food could not satisfy their hunger, and that speaking about thirst could not quench thirst. This immediate sense that this word is like bread, that our engagement with it, this is an old rabbinic concept. This text is like wheat. Now it needs us, and we start kneading this dough into dough, and we bring our experience and our imagination, and then we bake it together in our and it becomes living bread, something that actually satisfies that deepest hunger. So we'll take our launching place for this morning from this simple acknowledgement that we are readers. We are readers. We are readers who also care about those who God cares for. So that reading and caring is inextricably woven together, inseparable. How we read the text is partly what we're going to speak about, because there are various ways to read it, and there isn't one specific way, although I'm going to be raising up one of them in particular. But how we read it makes a difference in the kind of relating, I'm saying this badly, how we read expresses the nature of the community that we're reading it in. I'm trying to make, if you have any questions at all, you should be jumping on me and asking me this. But you know, if you want to read the text openly, then you have to be open to what other people are saying. That's partly what I'm arguing for. If we're going to do a Bible study where I bring a text and I lead it and I want you to find this out and I want you to know this, that's a different kind of thing, and that has its place. But in the kind of reading fellowship that I'm describing that we had among peasants and that we've continued to have in the covenant, and I know in many other places, where we are gathered around the Word in mutuality, reading this thing, trying to, talk deeply about it. That's a style of reading. That's another style of reading. So let's begin as readers. You'll see in your handout, Genesis 28. One of the important teachers in my life has also been this Jewish philosopher named Martin Buber. If you may know about his essential work, I and Thou. But Buber was also a Bible translator. He translated the Hebrew Bible into German the first time that anybody had done it since Luther, which was kind of daring. And as he was translating it, he noticed various structures in the writing of it, certain styles that were really critical and were what actually helped us read it more carefully and fruitfully. He also says that whenever we open a text, we should open it as if we have not read it before. Let whatever word or sayings or images come to us, sometimes as surprise, because we don't know where the Spirit will ferment. We have to hold ourselves open. And as I'm saying this in the way that we're going to read this text, you know that the central practice of pastoral care, in all the various ways we're speaking about it, and you do it here, is about holding ourselves open to what the person is going to say. If I already imagine who they are and what this is about, or if I say to myself as a therapist, I sometimes do, and I have to hit myself, I've heard this before. No, you've not heard this before. You've not heard this from this person before, even though they may come week after week after week and say, I'm just telling you the same thing. I say, no, it's not the same thing. I'm listening. I'm holding myself open to hear something I've not heard. That's the same thing with the text. Familiarity dulls the senses. So here's the text, Genesis 28. I'm giving you the text as translated by a fellow by the name of Everett Fox, who actually is translating Martin Buber's Hebrew and German translation. It'll sound a little odd to you, and I'm glad for that, always. Because it helps us start as if it is something quite new. So, Genesis 28, this is the great story of the moment where we call it, it's called Jacob's dream. So let's set the stage. Let's just get ourselves on the page. Do you remember before the dream happens, what has just happened in Jacob's life?
He sent all his family and everyone across the river, I think?
Not quite. He doesn't have a family yet.
Oh,
This is early on.
he has just cheated his brother out of
He's
his birthright.
He's just cheated his brother out of his birthright. This is an unbelievable text in which we watch this happen right before our eyes as he and his mother conspire to trick Isaac. Remember, it's just a great scene. Almost a farce. Isaac has, wool strapped on his arm because his brother's hairy. He holds it, let me touch you, wool. He says, well, it feels like Esau, but it sounds like Jacob. He failed to disguise his voice. And they keep doing this, and we wonder all the way along, is this actually going to happen? Is he going to get away with this? And he does, which is always a great mystery to me. But once he's had the blessing from Dad, you remember the prophecy originally was that the younger would serve the older and the older would serve the younger. He's about to bless Esau, but instead by trickery he blesses the younger the way God has said it was going to go. And so just having received the blessing, he hears, of course, that Esau is more than upset, that Esau wants to kill him. So Mom figures out a way for him to get out of town and go up to her brother Laban. So in this text, he is running away from home for the first time, away from mother for the first time, and out on his own in a world that's dangerous. So here's the text. Yaakov, which is Jacob in Hebrew, Yaakov went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. He encountered a certain place. He had to spend the night there, for the sun had set. He took one of the stones of the place and set it at his head. He lay down in that place. And he dreamt. Here a ladder was set up on the earth, its top reaching the heavens. Here, messengers of God going up and down on it. Here, Yahweh standing over against him. Yahweh said, I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham your father and the God of Yitzhak. That's Isaac. The land on which you lie I give to you and to your seed. Your seed will be like the dust of the earth. You will burst forth seaward, eastward, and northward, southward. All the clans of the soil will find blessing through you and through your seed. Here, I am with you. I will watch over you wherever you go and will bring you back to this soil. Indeed, I will not leave you until I've done what I have spoken to you. Yaakov awoke from his sleep and said, why? Yahweh is in this place, and I did not know it. He was awestruck and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than a house of God, and that is the gate of heaven. So Yaakov rose early in the morning, took the stone that he had set at his head, and set it up as a standing pillar, and poured oil on top of it. And he called the name of the place Bethel, or house of God. Bethel, we know in English. A lot of Bethel churches. And Yaakov vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this way that I go, and will give me food to eat and a garment to wear, and if I come back in peace to my father's house, Yahweh shall be my God to me, and this stone that I've set up as a standing pillar shall become a house of God. In everything that you give me, I shall tithe to you. So in this reading, if you've just let yourself kind of associate, do you hear some words that kind of stood out for you, some place in the text where your kind of imagination goes? Let's just play with this. Let's just be readers for a little while.
I think the thing that struck out to me was just where he said, I realized that God is with me here. I'm looking for it. Oh, I did not know. He was awestruck and said, how awesome is this place?
Yeah. Yahweh is in this place, and I did not know it. I wonder, if we were just to see this as a brilliant kind of opportunity for us to look at human dynamics. So, if Yahweh is there, how is actually Jacob feeling? Does he want Yahweh to be there? Is there can you imagine any conflict with that? He's caught running away. He's caught running away.
Does Yahweh know about the deception?
Does Yahweh know about the deception? Aye. There is this great thing about human beings is when we've been deceptive. I don't know much about this myself, but and you just carry this in you, hoping that nobody finds out. And it's not as if there is this superego up there in which we, but not, it's how it is with us. And we also know that this is also another dynamic in life, that if we carry a secret with us, then there's a part of us that we have to withhold. And whenever we withhold, we cannot be present with our whole being. And what Yahweh wants is our whole being.
I think, the other thing that kind of struck me is just the confusion that Jacob would feel that I'm on the lam here, I've done something that really wasn't too good. My brother wants to kill me, and yet God says, here I am with you, I will watch over you. With what? You're going to do what? No, I'm supposed to be punished here, right? Isn't that the deal? And it's like, no. And so the sense of the paradox, the confusion.
Absolutely.
Who is this? Who is this God?
Yeah.
And it must have been a great relief to him, to have Yahweh know about it and say all these positive things.
Yeah, on one hand, I mean, we can hear that it's really mixed, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot happening in this man as he's running for his life, having left his family, carrying with him this thing that he did. I mean, let's look at what he did. You were going to say something.
It'd take us away a little bit, so go ahead.
That's okay.
Well, I was thinking of he's all that in his family to his mom. And there's definitely a sense of not only conviction but humility in that God is already here.
Yeah.
And I was thinking in terms of pastoral relationships, and a lot of the patients that I have are significantly different economic level, and I think it's very tempting for me to come in and feel like I'm the one that's the hero and I'm coming to you, and I think it's been a challenge and a conviction to say God is already here in this place. Wow, look, God was here and I didn't even know it.
Ah. You're hearing this? Yeah. I mean, how many times does that happen in sessions that you're with where you think this is really depending on you, and then you're surprised? Yeah. I read this text a lot with people that I'm seeing, and just the way we're doing it. To see what it is that is excited in them, what their response is to this, including perhaps the possibility they may tell their own stories of secrets. They may not tell that directly to me. That's not how I work. Do you have any secrets in your life you'd like to share? But when we are listening to Jacob and watching Jacob, something in us is called up. It's there. We feel, if we let ourselves feel it, if we come onto this stage, like as with Jacob, that stuff is there. We know what it's like. We know what it's like to be found and what it's like to be accepted. This is the primal text in the Hebrew Scriptures. Human being, the debut of human beings, doesn't go that well, as you remember. We show ourselves to be who we really are. We're sneaky and we're deceptive, and we don't do what we're told, and then we try to get out of it. So in this moment, there's this wonderful line. So Yahweh was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, or in Hebrew, in the breezy time of the day. You can just see this wonderful anthropomorphism, but this Yahweh present enjoying his garden. And his first words out of his mouth, other than in the way we think about it in terms of starting creation, let there be. The first words out of his mouth to a human being in dialogue is, where are you? Where are you? And Adam, where's Adam? He's hiding. I'm hiding. Why are you hiding? Well, I heard you were walking in the garden and I was afraid. Afraid? Why were you afraid? Because I'm naked. Who told you that you were naked? Well, the woman you gave to me, you know, the snake you gave to me, I mean, we kind of just pass this thing along. But this critical thing touches the center point of the kind of care you're talking about, and we find with Jacob. Our deepest instinct is to hide, and our deepest longing is to be found. Because otherwise we live in fear that we're going to be found. And often when we're found by some people, you know, it's awful. So how, in that sense, you know, how do we find, how do we look, how to receive somebody who says to us, who comes in to see you and says, I feel I just stole something from my brother. Yeah.
You say something maybe talking about fear, but it goes back to how you, I think, started the dialogue here, but how trust is so important. And when I think of fear and trust, spiritually they're opposites. So the more we fear, we don't trust. The more we can trust, it drives that fear away. And so in meeting with folks, how do we make that safe place that they can begin to trust and see, oh, this person is safe. I can begin to share my story. It's the darkness, the secrets, the whatever.
Absolutely.
It's all trust. And it's all fear that holds that darkness.
Absolutely. It's all trust.
And what strikes me is that shame holds on unless there's repair in the relationship. And this passage shows repair.
Yeah. That's really helpful. I mean, this is the language. We don't use fear as much in our world, but shame. This is where we hide. And in some ways, it's a defense. If I feel shame and I reduce myself and I get really small, I'm not going to let anybody near that. It's just too hard. I also just think of this aloneness of this man who not just has done what he's done and has to carry that secret. But the fact is that he has no family at this point. I mean, he's on his way someplace else. But you can imagine many people that you see who have no idea where they're going. What's going to happen to them? They've run. For one reason or another, they've had to leave the family. They're on their own. What's that like? In the world of Jacob, it's dangerous. In our world, it's dangerous. Plus, he just thought he stole the blessing, which in his mind is, do you know, what does he think he's stolen? The inheritance. And now he's kicked out of the family. That didn't seem to work. So when Yahweh, the one who walks in the garden in the cool of the day, ends up standing next to him, this is what Yahweh says. I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. Now just let that phrase ring in your head for a second. This is Jacob. The first thing out of Yahweh's mouth is, I am the God. Let's make this really family. I am the God of your grandpa and your father. We could imagine, I don't know, what's that like to hear that? I am the God of the universe. I am the God who made all things. I am the up and the down and the in and the out. You know, I am eternal. I am the God of your grandpa. And I am the God of your father.
So he's saying, I really know you, and I know where you came
Yeah.
And how about, I seek to establish a relationship with you, and you're inextricably tied, as you're inextricably tied to your grandfather and your father, so am I inextricably tied to you.
So powerful, Lance. Here's a kid running away from home, hearing for the first words out of Yahweh's mouth is, you are part of this story. This is your family. he's going to be part of this family is the drama and the tension in the narrative. How is this going to work? Can, in fact, you steal a blessing? It's a question that I bring with this text all the time, because I've worked with many people in which there's this kind of sibling stuff, you know. Who really gets the blessing in the family? How do you get blessing?
From the blessor.
From the blessor. What do you have to do to get the blessing from the blessor? Be in relationship. For some people, it means being good, doing everything right. I'm the good daughter. How come she gets the blessing when she's out running around and doing this and that? She seems to be favored, and I've been, so what text does this come to mind if we go from text to text? Prodigal son. And this is how Bible works, and this is how it's supposed to work, particularly when we're in a group and we're in a collective imagination. This basic theme is present through the entire biblical landscape. I read that text often with siblings who are fighting. Not because I want them to get a point, I want them to talk about it. You know? So here is this phrase, I'm the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. And then this, the land on which you lie, I give to you and to your seed. Your seed will be like the dust of the earth. You will burst forth seaward, eastward, northward, southward. All the clans of the soil will find blessing through you and through your seed. Now, what's he hearing? Pardon me?
He's hearing about his children.
He's hearing about his children. That's very good. He's hearing about his children. Have we ever heard this language before? This is the same blessing to Abraham and the same blessing to Isaac. It turns out that the blessing now goes to Jacob, but it's not the blessing he thought he stole. And I think it's not the blessing you can steal. This blessing can only be given. Sometimes it doesn't seem fair in the text, because sometimes blessing doesn't seem fair. Or sometimes we misinterpret what blessing is. How come they seem to be blessed and I'm not? Well, haven't we all been with people, and haven't we all felt ourselves that question? I mean, that's also through many of the Psalms. How come the schmucks get it all? Why do the righteous suffer? What is blessing? Here, the blessing goes back to Grandpa, to the beginning of the story, which is, I called your grandpa here and your grandma to start a narrative. And this narrative is inextricably moving on, not because you like it or don't like it, because it's my story, you know, and you're in it. So what he hears is, I think sometimes like a petty thief, he steals something overwhelming, thinking that he got this. I don't know if I want this. I thought I got this. I thought I got a pension. But then this very personal statement, here I am with you. This is, how do you suppose he hears that? I am with you.
Comfort.
Comfort.
Support.
Support. Let's just write that down.
Surprise.
Pardon me?
Surprise.
Surprised. Hope.
I would say some challenge, though. I'm watching.
Say it more.
I said also some challenge. I'm watching.
Absolutely. Challenge. did you hear this? Did you get a sense, I think, of what you're saying? I'm here. Good. Well.
Really?
I think of this often in Psalm 139. Where can I go to escape your spirit? That there's a certain edge sometimes in that voice. Where can I go? Where can I hide? There is no hiding because I'm searching for you. I'm not going to ask you, where are you? You know. So there is challenge, of course, if we're honest with that challenge. Here we're again at the core of our work of care, particularly in the pastoral biblical sense. There is no but we have to mean it. There's no more important statement than this. I am with you in this. Presence. This word, Yahweh, Yud, He, Vav, He, which we translate as Yahweh. We often in our translations, it is I am that I am. This is the name that Yahweh gives to Moses when he's at the bush. But there is no way to say am, frankly, in Hebrew. What this really translates into is I will be there. I will be there. And even more so, I will be there as I will be there. Which is itself a mystery. So when Moses goes back to the people, he says, this is the name of your God. I will be there, as I will be there. I don't know. I will be there. I will not be there in the way you think I might be there, but I will be there in the way that I will be there. But don't doubt for a moment that I won't be there. Could you be there like this? Could you be a little more like that? No, I will be there as I will be there. And that's the trust here that's beginning to develop. I will be with you. What does that mean? Well, he says, on a very concrete level, I'll watch over you wherever you go, will bring you back to this soil. I will not leave you until I've done what I've spoken. So now you're Jacob and you're hearing this, that how this story is going to go is God will be present and bring him back here. How you're hearing that?
For some reason that makes me think of the shepherd looking for the sheep.
Yeah.
That no matter where they go,
Yeah.
he looks until he finds them.
Yeah.
And I read that to my children, and my oldest wanted me to read it over and over. We had a little story picture book, over and over, about how Jesus found that sheep.
Yeah. That's very good. I just love the way text just kind of comes up. This is a really important text in our tradition. There was a fellow in Sweden whose name was Ekman. I think I'm right. And they kind of branded him a, quote, universalist, because he wasn't so much a part of, people are going to hell and people are going to heaven. And he built this off of this story. And this one word in the story, that the shepherd goes looking until. And he came to this because one of his best friend's sons committed suicide, and this guy was completely distraught that this kid was lost forever. And this idea that the shepherd or the searcher, the one walking in the garden in the cool of the day, is continually saying, where are you? Itself is a very, I find that myself to be accurate. This isn't finished. You don't get out of this. I'm looking until I find you. That may challenge some of our theologies, but at least it's not my job to say it's over. I don't know what's after or how that works, but it's a very powerful connection. I will not leave you until I bring you back. Now I just put this in mind. What is Jacob coming back to? That might be fearful because he's leaving because his brother wants to kill him. And because he just created a major disturbance in the family life. I mean, what is life like after he leaves for Rebekah and for Isaac? You suppose Rebekah fesses up? You know, this was kind of my rules. We did this together. Family systems. So Yaakov wakes up from his sleep. This is all dream. It's so important that it's dream. I should ask you, why is it important that it's dream? What difference does it make that Jacob is hearing this in a dream?
It comes from deep within him.
Yeah, deep within.
Jung says that when you dream, you awaken.
Jung says, when you dream, you awaken. I like that. And our defenses are down. Our guard is down. All sorts of voices come in. And it's why dreams are so critical in the text, in the biblical text, Gospels and the Hebrew text. In some ways, we're able to listen. We may forget, we may turn away. But this time, when Jacob wakes up, he has like an epiphany. Yaakov awoke from his sleep and said, "Why? Yahweh's in this place, and I did not know." What does that mean? What's he saying? How does he help us understand this critical part of our life and work?
That even when we aren't aware of his presence, he's there.
Yeah.
In that moment, he discovers truth.
Yeah.
We need that vulnerability in order to experience what he has in store for us as opposed to what we've preconceived.
Yeah, do you hear this? It is this very vulnerable moment when these things happen. When we're not guarded, when we're down, and maybe even a little humbled. There's this wonderful rabbinic commentator named Rashi, who his commentary, he has a way of reading the text called a pshat. He goes to the simple meaning, not the literal meaning, but the plain meaning, he says. When Jacob wakes up and says, "God is in this place and I did not know it," that is the definition of being awake. To be awake is to know that God is in this place. To the extent that we are unaware of that, much like Brueggemann's prayer, as the day goes on, I'm going to be caught up in all this kind of stuff. I'm really asleep. And this is a critical piece for us as caregivers. Because when we're with somebody, we dang well better be awake. We may not be awake to that presence, but we can open ourselves to that presence. We can't make this presence come. But we can open ourselves up to the presence that is there. But we have to do that. We have to be present. We have to be, I am with you, awake. There's plenty of times, late in the night, where I'm really struggling. I want to go home. I'm tired. Hard enough just to be awake. But I keep this in mind. And I've learned how to see this even in other ways. I'm a long-time part of an interfaith study in which we read texts from other traditions. And this is really the heart of Buddhism as well. Enlightenment is not knowledge. It's being awake. It's knowing what's going on. It's being completely there where you're at. And this is so present in the text. And then, of course, we know it goes away. And then we feel like we're on our own. Which is one of the reasons why it's so important that we understand this in relational terms. Jacob is the quintessential individual, isolated, estranged from family, by himself. And the act of being present by Yahweh is to make connection. Meanwhile, all those fears are still there, and Jacob is still Jacob. He's conniving, and he wants to make a deal. Yaakov vows a vow, now on verse 20. If God will be with me, I want to just notice this. So Yahweh is speaking to Jacob. I will be with you. And Jacob now is speaking in not the language of Yahweh, which is presence, and I will be with you, right here in the garden, in our lives. But God, Elohim, the one who makes the heavens and the earth. Now he's almost like abstract. If God will be with me, if anybody's overhearing me, and will watch over me on this way that I go, and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, and if I come back in peace to my father's house, Yahweh shall be God to me.
Wow.
And this stone that I have set up as a standing pillar shall become a house of God. In everything you give me, I shall tithe to you. Yes, tithe to you. So, what do you hear here?
Doubt.
Pardon me?
Doubt.
Doubt.
Conditional relationship.
Conditional relationship.
Sounds like Jacob's gone back to sleep.
Sounds like Jacob's gone back to sleep. Very nice. It's just, one of the things that's so great about Jacob and reading Jacob with other people is how remarkably human Jacob is. He wants something down in writing. And you know, as we were talking about, if he's going to come back to this land, he's got to meet his brother. That's clearly on his mind because he wants to know if he comes back, if there's going to be peace. And if you fulfill all of these conditions, then you will be my God. And here's this one I just love. This is so Jacob. In everything you give me, I'll give a tenth back to you. Isn't it marvelous?
There's a lot of control there.
Oh, yeah.
You will be my God.
Yeah. And the wealthier you make me, you get more, by the way.
I'm in charge, God, thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'm God, yeah. I just love that. And I'm building this little hut here for a little place so people can come and acknowledge that you were here once. You know? So human of us. What a guy. What a deal. Compare these two vows. I will be with you. The ground on which you lie, I give to you, and your offspring. They will be seeds. They will be like the shore. This is the same. I'm giving you this. And Yaakov says, well, this is really what I want. I want to be taken care of. I want my brother not to kill me. And I want a lot of money. And you'll benefit from this because then you can be my God and you'll get a kickback of everything that I give you. But let's also acknowledge that as we read this ourselves, and as we may read this text with other people, that this is a learning experience. I mean, Jacob has a long way to go to kind of get it, if he ever really, really gets it. And that takes us back to the scene later on when he wrestles with the stranger. What happens in that intervening 20 years with Uncle Laban is unbelievable. These two guys try to out-trick each other all the way down, all the way to the last moment. Or one-upping each other. And it's both so funny and wonderful. It's why, you know, when I am able in care to read a whole narrative, just without an agenda, just Let's just read this and find ourselves and begin to have this responsive dialogue through the text and then with each other. You know, not this is the text you need to read in order to feel this, but let's just read this whole thing. I think it's so critical why that there should be conventicles in which this is ongoing in the congregation, because these texts become much more readily available when we need them for serious care. We have an experience of reading together. One of the texts that I've had the class read is a fellow by the name of Ed Wimberly, who was a pastoral counselor in African American tradition and writes about Bible. And one of the things he says is that most of the people in his congregation know the Bible. It's their life, and it's not just that. It's here. It's in the experience of the people. So there's a kind of access to it that sometimes isn't there for us because we hold the Bible out here. You know, makes sense? Yeah. So the more we read together, just in communities of faith like our ancestors did, the more readily this can be used by you who care and can say, let's go back and reread this. We have some experience of how to do that.
I'm feeling some sympathy for Jacob.
You're feeling sympathy for Jacob?
I am. What kind of spiritual formation did he get?
Yeah.
I mean, where was their teaching about who Yahweh was? Did Abraham teach Isaac? Isaac teach Jacob and Esau? Or did they simply learn from the people they were living with, and that's what their gods did?
Well, I don't think they had Shelley for a Sunday school teacher. It's one of the reasons we have Sunday school. And why, when you get into Deuteronomy and you have the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, Adonai Echad, and you shall teach this to your children. It's an injunction early on saying, this needs to be taught regularly. So I think you're absolutely right. And this is also going to be true for many people that we see. These are people, many who are not going to come from places where they have any idea of what this is. Or they may have some idea. The old Stuart Hiltner, who wrote a lot about pastoral counseling, used to say, even in 1949, a lot of people have no more notion of David and Goliath's story than Popeye and a giant. Don't know it. It's just out there in a kind of vague sort of way. So yeah, what is Jacob bringing with him? And we could imagine from his epiphany, Janet, that he brings something. I just think he's getting a heck of a theological education in one night. And one of them is, perhaps, that having run from home, I don't know how he can experience that the God who was God there, Yahweh who was God where the family was, is also the same God who is now in this strange place, out in the middle of nowhere. And so to discover that is to begin to get a sense that the container is larger. There is no place I can go, finally, the psalmist in 139 will say. And we can talk about that as omnipresence, but I just find that unsatisfying. I just think the presence, the real concrete presence of Yahweh walking in the car, is walking around this campus. Visiting the moments in which I'm talking with someone or someone's trying to tell me their story. Not a concept, but a real presence. Somebody once asked Martin Buber, this great philosopher, do you believe in God? And he says, no, but I trust him. It's that dimension that I think my grandfather was getting at about the conventicle and these peasant people. They weren't articulating theology. They were deeply embedded in this story. And they learned that this trust was not just an easy thing. I mean, Jacob is going for 20 years. He's got a lot to do. It's a huge part of the story that helps transform him. And we will see that, of course, if we're reading this with our people, that this is not a quick fix. I mean, by the way, Jacob hasn't confessed anything. But you can't always confess right away. You need to first, this needs to be tended. This sometimes, and I'll say this because you know this as well as I, that one of the things that happens in pastoral care is that we tend to go too quick. We want this to kind of get resolved. It's very true of the Psalms, which we'll look at this afternoon. I want to get the praise. I don't want to just stay here in this lament. Or I want to get Jacob kind of, I want to get this put together in some sort of way. He's got a lot to go through. The question is, can we be there for our people who also have a lot to go through? If we say we're going to be there, and this is a key piece for Henry Nouwen, who distinguishes pastoral care from professional care that is contractual, and pastoral care which is covenantal. You know what I'm saying? When you come to me as a therapist, when I'm being a therapist, we have a contract. You have to pay this amount of money. You come on this particular time. You can break the contract. I can break the contract, frankly. I don't often, but it's possible. If you don't pay and if you don't come, I'm not signing up anymore. But in a covenantal relationship, that's a different kind of thing. And that can be worrisome, how to manage that and not be overwhelmed, by people who won't go away. You know what I mean. And at the same time, attend to them while they're in this long place of self-discovery, or while their own theology is being expanded by experience. Now, I want to point out one other piece in this, which I think is so critical. One of the things that Buber recognized in the way Bible is written is that the Hebrew in particular loves repetition. And English hates it. So Hebrew, but it has a very powerful effect, which we know only unoccasionally in oratory. Something is repeated, fixes the ear. Since this was originally an oral tradition, part of repetition was that you give the same word and the ear has something to hang on to. I have a dream today. It is a dream rooted in the American dream. I have a dream today. Now there's all this content happening in that speech, but what we're reminded again and again, is this is a dream. I love it because in that kind of oratory, you don't have to explain. You're not telling people that. You're just using the word over and over. So reading requires of us to be very thoughtful and careful readers. And because we're reading in translation, it becomes a little more difficult because more often than not in our translations, when English finds the same word repeated, it goes, oh, too much, let's find a synonym. So we miss the carefully placed repetition that the Hebrew author has there. This is, by the way, a very high view of the text. God is in the details in some ways. Why this word? Why this word? Why this word placed here? Why this story placed here? So in this text, as in most texts, there is a repeated word here that might just elude us unless our antenna were up. And if I can say this, this is also true for active listening, which is the central piece of our work of being present and of attending. Listening to how people say, what they say, and how they say it, and sometimes the words they repeat. We catch that word and we say, you keep saying this word, I'm really interested in this word. What does it mean? How do you translate that? How can I understand why it's so much a part of your vocabulary? There's a lot of repetition in this one place, but let's look at a particular one. Anything you noticed, by the way?
Here.
Fear. I'm sorry.
Here.
Here.
Mm-hmm.
Here. Here. It underscores presence. Here. This place. Right now. This moment. Not another moment, this moment. This moment we're in. Take your pencil or pen, and I'll read the first verse or so, and I'm going to emphasize the word that's repeated. Yaakov went out from Beersheba, went toward Haran, and encountered a certain place. He had to spend the night there, for the sun had set. Now he took one of the stones of the place, set it on his head, and lay down in that place. It seems redundant. And to the English word, it is redundant. But it's very carefully used again and again and again. Now, go to 17. You with me? He was awestruck and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and that is the gate of heaven." He called the name of the place Bethel. Where did I miss one? 16. Oh yeah, God is in this place. Good, right in the middle. The important phrase. 6 uses of the word place. And so if we're kind of imaginative, or we hear somebody use the word and we kind of inquire, so what's the effect of this word repeated 3 times at the beginning and 3 times at the end? You always kind of know this is intentional because it's 3. It's like a joke, you know, a rabbi and a priest and a remember that joke? A rabbi and a priest and a pastor go into a bar, and the bartender says, "What is this, a joke?" 3 times is really an important structure here. But so you have place, 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 and then place, place, place. So what is this writer asking us to account for? What is this about?
In the future, we're going to have to come back to this place.
It's this place. Location, location, location. Every place you go there, that's nice. It seems kind of secondary. So what? You know. Well, of course, in the Hebrew imagination, this word makom is often a word that's used for God. They call hamakom is the place. The place. Not in some kind of vague way, but here, right now, in this place. But it also asks us, and I've done this often in care and sometimes in counseling, to acknowledge what it is that Jacob is doing. I mean, he takes these stones and he makes a pillar. I don't know if you've ever been around. People do this every once in a while. You're on a shore, you're in the mountains, and somebody's kind of built a little deal. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, what was that about? So I want to ask you this question before we move on. I want you to think of a place or places where you have been when you have become awake. Or I want you to think of places where you go to visit, where being awake is, I don't want to say more possible, or, you know, it's like your place to go when you need to kind of really know that God is in this place. You know what I'm saying? It's absolute. Let's take that word place seriously and take it in. I'll ask this of my clients. So let's name some places for you. So let's do that. Just think about place in your life. Think about those places where you might have taken some stones, something to acknowledge. And tell me, where's your place?
47th Street going into Lakeshore Drive.
47th Street and Lakeshore Drive? Yahweh is in that place?
I was going to cancel my baptism, and there was a man there selling flowers where he had long hair and a beard. And he said, "This is not for sale. It's a gift. It's free."
Yeah.
Well, just being here in the seminary building is a place for me, because I think God did a lot of work with me in seminary. And when I was here studying, really, God took me apart and put me back together. It's a neat place. It's always neat to come back. It's a place.
So when you come back to this place today, you remember that. This is the thing about places. It's a critical part of memory. It is so easy in the midst of trouble to get almost dementia, amnesia. We forget. And so you come back and you come back here and it's there,
Mine would be Tui Beach. One day I was going through a really hard time, and I went walking, and I had my headphones on, and I was singing my love to the Lord, and this man just comes up to me, and he says, "I don't believe in God." He kind of tapped me, and he goes, "But that was so beautiful, and I want you to know that God does love you, and He's here with you." Yeah.
Did you hear the story? You have an encounter with somebody who doesn't believe in God, who tells her that God is with her. That's what we might call a malachim in Hebrew, one of the angels, one of the messengers. I wonder what he received that day. Man, he's somewhere telling a story. I was out walking on the beach, and this woman was singing to the Lord. And I tapped her on the shoulder. Other places?
Summer camp,
Summer camp.
both as a child and as an adult. Camp is away from home, where especially children and young people can detach from family and have their own personal experience. There's something about it.
Yeah. For many children, they bring that experience of camp all the way through. I hope we aren't underestimating the value of that. Yeah. To get away. Other particular places?
Washington Island, Wisconsin.
Washington Island, Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's away from everything, it's surrounded in nature. Particularly, I can't think of the name of the building. It's a building that's built with no nails, place of worship. I cannot think of the name, but you step in there, there's a path you walk through, a prayer path, and you step in that building, and it's just like your pit.
Yeah.
It's just beautiful.
So if I were to ask you, you should go back to the place where you felt the ground under your feet, really felt it. You know where you'd go? I think sometimes if I had the imagination and I would look at, if all the places where this happened for people, there were little piles of rocks, just imagine what our landscape would look like. And we would be walking down these streets and see this pile of rocks and go, I wonder what happened there. God is in this place. I didn't know that. But God is in this place, and I didn't know that. There's no more important, quote, information or awareness. Now, it isn't just personal. And this is why, another reason why I think place is so important, and why I use it when I'm reading this text with others, to spend time talking about and exploring those places with them. In her book, Far Away Nearby, this very gifted writer, Rebecca Solnit, is describing a life in which she's a very painful relationship with her mother, who has dementia and is dying. And it was a long, hard, judgmental relationship that she's trying to work through while she's caring for her mother. I don't suppose you've ever heard any stories like that before.
Not at all.
So she was invited to a university to talk about places of all things. And so she does. This is what she says. I talked about places, about the ways that we often talk about the love of place, by which we mean our love of places, but seldom of how the places love us back, what they give us. What they give is continuity, something to return to. They offer a familiarity that allows some portion of our lives to remain connected and coherent. They give us an expansive scale in which our troubles are set into context, in which the largeness of the world is balm to loss, trouble, and ugliness. And distant places give us refuge in territories where our own histories aren't so deeply entrenched, and we can imagine other stories, other selves, or just drink up the quiet and the respite. The bigness of the world, she says, is redemption. Despair compresses you into a small place and literally a hollow in the ground. To dig deeper into the self, to go to underground is sometimes necessary, but so is the other route of getting out of yourself into the larger world, into the openness in which you need not clutch your stories so tightly to your chest. Being able to travel both ways matters, and sometimes the way back into the heart of the question begins by going outward and beyond. This is the expansiveness that sometimes comes literally in a landscape or that tugs you out of yourself and into a larger story. What is she saying? And then we need to take a break. I think I'm already past that time. But this place in the world, to be in the world, affects what is happening in us. It gives us something. It brings us into a connection with that world, that larger connection. It gets us out of, in that sense, ourself. Doesn't deny that that self is in agony, but it sets that agony or that despair in a different context. When I go to my place, I'm not letting go. Well, I am kind of letting go of that pain, but I know it's still there. But I feel it differently. Why? Because that's the nature of connection. The isolation that comes in depression or anxiety or despair or that gets us small and little, is healed in connection, both in us being with them, saying, I'm here with you, but also vitally in place. There's this Buddhist story of this young monk who comes to his teacher, and he's in terrible despair. His life is saturated with it. It's almost like in every place of his life, he can't get out of it. And so his teacher takes this glass of water and takes a heaping tablespoon of salt and pours it in there, stirs it up, and says, taste it. And he tastes it, spits it out. He says, yeah, that's what it's like. It's awful. Can't stand it. And he dumps it out, and then he takes the salt, same amount of salt, and he goes down to the lake nearby, and he dumps it into the lake. Stirs it up, takes a glass of water out of the lake, brings it to the young monk and says, here, taste it. Tastes fresh. Yeah. Same amount of salt, different container. So this sense of that Jacob is that this very small, reduced story, which is expressed even in his vow, his fear, is nonetheless now set by a place that is in the larger world in which he now knows Yahweh is present. Now, however he lives out that story, that's an entirely different context. And I just think it's so artful the way the Hebrew does that without just slamming us with a 2x4, but just asking us to reflect on the nature of place in this story and then in our unfolding lives.
It was interesting to me in this translation that I expected when God responds to him to use the word place, but he uses the word soil.
Yeah. The soil is, yeah, very concrete, isn't it? But that's also the language he uses with Abraham and with Isaac. The land. The land and soil are really the same word, Adamah, or Eretz, one of those two words. I think we're time for a break. Shall we do that? Just get some coffee, cookie, fruit, take a walk, take a breath, go outside, come back or not. Let's say, should we say 15 minutes? We'll start at 11. I sent out, I think, for reading a couple chapters to you. You might have had them and you might have had a chance to read them or not. It isn't that critical. Because I really wanted to, if you haven't been acquainted with some of the history or the diversity of this question of how to use text, when to use text in pastoral care, there isn't, of course, only one way, and there's wide divergence of uses. I have a particular way of doing it, but it's just my particular way, and it comes out of a tradition of pastoral counseling that two of the chapters that I gave you was from William Oglesby, kind of a grandpa in my business and pastoral counseling, and Donald Capps, who still is writing. I think it's helpful sometimes just to get the history of it, because pastoral care and counseling, it's been a dynamic process for a long time. I mean, it's really quite wonderful. It came into being early in the 20th century with the beginnings of the kind of modern counseling and psychotherapies. A lot of people in the church were fascinated by these psychologies and how they could help, particularly these counseling approaches. But they also wanted to hold on to the tradition of both theological reflection and Bible. The trouble is that in most of these counseling modalities, when you bring a text into a counseling session or a care session, it changes the session. And often how we view the text or how we work with the text changes the relationship that we've tried to build in our care. For example, it happens to me all the time. I mean, I really work hard at developing trust and mutuality. I want to listen actively. Then sometimes, I bring in a text and, lo and behold, I get carried away.
You mean you start preaching?
Yeah. And I start, and sometimes I'm really good. And then I look, I kind of come to, or as they say, come awake, and I look across at the person sitting in the chair, and they're, I'm aware of it. And this is going to happen. I don't know if it happens to you, but, or I get into some kind of technical thing, and I'm kind of don't know what to do, and so I'm going to show that I'm an expert, or let me tell you about depression, but when Bible comes in, it often becomes somewhat rough because people have an association with the biblical text, often a history with it, some of it not a good history. Often their sense of the text is, I don't know anything about this text, tell me what's in it. I don't want, that's not the kind of counseling relationship that I have. So one of the things that Donald Capps is talks about all the time is, if I can find it, there is general agreement that any use of the Bible in counseling or care should not violate the principles on which the counselor normally operates. That means that if we're going to talk about Bible in care, we have to think about our approach and the nature of the relationship that we have. And so even like in our reading, this is an invitation for you What do you see? What is coming up for you? Not what I think you ought to know, but what's coming up for you. And so if you look in, for example, with Oglesby, when he thinks about text, he thinks about it in themes. I think sometimes in themes, but less and less in themes and more in text. Because sometimes when we talk about themes in care, we're talking about the text again and not reading it. And I don't think necessarily sometimes people need to know something. Maybe they're coming to know something. So there is a certain amount of instruction. But if you're developing a relationship with a person, as you know, you're listening actively, you're engaged actively, you're being fully present, you're taking in as much as you can. And if in fact the Bible then that text becomes another voice, in which now I'm interacting with that, and I'm interacting with this person's interacting. It's a kind of wonderful dialogue that's taking place. I don't know where it's going to go. I know sometimes where I would like it to go. But that's always the problem in care. Now again, sometimes, because we do all sorts of care, we'll use the text in different ways. You know, I remember when I was really sick in the hospital. I mean, I was close to leaving this place. And I had asked that nobody really come, or we had kind of asked, because I didn't have an immune system, didn't want people in the room. And in comes Glenn Weiberg. I don't know if you know him or of him. An old friend, used to be at North Park Church and then Salem. And he comes in and he opens up a text and he says, I look to the hills. Where does my help come from? He just brings the text in. And frankly, he was right. I don't want to study, but I wanted to hear it. So our care is so divergent, but that means we have to be thoughtful about the kind of care we're in. And then if we're going to introduce the text, whether we're going to introduce it or we're going to wonder with the person what text to read, that it's in keeping with our approach. Does that make sense? So there is in Oglesby's mind these three different kinds of approaches. One is knowing, he writes about, and doing, and being. Knowing which he orients to insight-oriented therapy, which is one of the things that happens in good counseling, is we explore what's going on inside the person. Because we need another person, we need a mirror, we need some response. I'm really anxious, I don't know why I'm anxious. So now we can develop a conversation and explore that. And as we gain more insight into that, we can actually get some control. Am I making sense? Yeah? This is really common for all of us. Well, now you see, you can use the text, it says caps, in a kind of dynamic way. You can associate a text with the particular situation that the person's in and ask that you bring this in so this text actually helps understand in conversation what this person's going through. We did this a little bit with Jacob. Somebody is lost and is running away, broken family. We're reading this text, and just by associating to Jacob, some things in the person's life are going to become clearer. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's this kind of dynamic parallel. Hiltner used to call this companionship of feelings. And of course it's mutual, because as we explore what it's like for us to carry a secret and run for our lives and not want to be caught, we are also filling out the character in the story. So the story becomes much more alive, because now it's our story. We're right there. And that's that connection, the other part of the connection about place. When we connect with this story, as you were saying, Lance, that now we are inextricably in this story too. And that's an amazing experience, to realize that this very, very personal thing that feels like I'm caught in this story is now connected into the larger story of God. Again, it's the container. It's not, the pain is there, The bewilderment is there. But there's all sorts of people in this story who've been bewildered. And now I'm in company. I'm in a company of others. So, and then there is this kind of doing, right doing, which is some people will come for help whose behavior is a real problem. And that also becomes an issue. How do we address that? My experience is that when I say you shouldn't do that, it's not that helpful. I mean, there are behavioral therapies, and they can be very, very helpful. There's no doubt about it. I'm just not very good at it. So I end up saying, but a structured behavioral change in terms of kind of right doing is also very present in the biblical text. You don't have to preach it or insist on it, but you can see, but when we're reading this, I mean, if we're following along with Jacob in terms of what he's done and the mess that he's created, and then we watch him through Uncle Laban for 20 years, we see that doing start to undo until he finally understands that now if he's going to come back to see, if he's going to come back, he's going to have to meet Esau. And he's going to have to do something when he meets Esau. And you know the story. I think it's one of the great moments in all of Bible. And I think of it all the time because it addresses my sense of the excess of our time. But Jacob has gotten all these things from Laban. Laban doesn't want to let him go because he's a good business guy. He's making Laban a lot of money. But he leaves, and he figures out how to do it with all this kind of chicanery. He's coming back, and he gets the word that Esau's coming to meet him. Now, you got to imagine he's thinking about this vow. If God will be with me and will bring me back to peace. Esau's coming to meet him. He's got 400 troops with him. So is God going to show up or not? I mean, it's like da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. And so he sets this thing aside, and he puts all this stuff in front, and makes certain that, and then he's there by himself at night. And we can't read that story right now, the wrestling at night. That's one of the great stories in all of literature. So it's over, and he's limping. He's had this struggle. He's just been renamed. The name Yaakov means heel holder on the one hand, but it also in Hebrew means thief. All names in Hebrew are verbs. So every time, Jacob's name's called, it's really thief, 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 deceiver, So then his name is changed to Israel, the one who wrestles with God. God wrestler. So God wrestler takes off. He's going to face his brother. And as they get closer and closer, Esau starts running at him. And he wraps his arms around Jacob and kisses him. And we think, in my mind, we think that this grace is going to come somehow through Jacob, but in fact it's coming through Esau. And so Jacob says, here, my brother, this all belongs to you, all this stuff that I've accrued with Laban. It's really all yours. And Esau says one of the great lines in Bible, which is, no, my brother, I have enough. I have enough. I don't need your stuff. I've resolved that. Which suggests that while our eyes have been following Jacob with Uncle Laban for 20 years, as if God isn't doing something over here too. It's just not on the front of the stage. The people, we think, of course, as Mark Twain says, we're God's pet. God's so interested in us, he follows everything we do. Well, he follows other people too. There's other things going on in other places. And so when we read that as dynamic, this dynamic that's happening in the text, it brings us to the dynamic that's happening with us. We share in that, we explore that. And then there is this, what Capps called this disclosive. which is, it's not that we know more, it's that something is opened us up to us that we haven't seen. And Paul Ricoeur, the great writer on hermeneutics, says this is world disclosive. It is like, it's like Jacob is getting all this personal information. This is good information for him. He's getting insight. God is in this place. I didn't know it's theological, but all this stuff is kind of growing in him. But there is something else happening on the stage that he sees and that we almost don't acknowledge, which is in the dream, there is a ladder. And there's people going up and people going down, these malachim, these messengers. And so what's in one sense disclosed to Jacob is, while I'm here standing by you in this place for you, by the way, there's a lot going on here that you are unaware of. And when you know that, when you know that God is in this place and I did not know it, that this is not just about you, that the container is now larger, there is a lot of interaction taking place. I mean, if we had the eyes to see, really, if we were really awake, think how close we are to these liminal dimensions. There's this great song that my wife Susan, who worked in hospice care in Vermont, they have these groups that go singing. Do you know about these groups? They call sings. They walk into rooms where people are dying into their house, and they gather around. A lot of it is shape singing, old English shape singing, and it's so powerful. And one of the songs they sing is, "There are angels hovering round. There are angels hovering round. There are angels, angels hovering round." And often, I believe, persons who are in this transition know that. I don't know how to talk about it, but it's so. That's the disclosive. That's what Capps is saying. So sometimes we choose a text because it seems to fit. Sometimes while we're reading the text that seems to fit, something is disclosed. Sometimes not. This is not in our control. Any questions about that? Yeah.
I guess as you talk about that, is that kind of the same thing as a moment of truth, that the epiphany, the aha experience, that now I have this realization that I didn't have before?
Right. Right. You have the sense of, I could not have come up with this myself. Something had to be opened up. And so it is so important that when we enter into care, that we are opened enough to be opened up. I gave you, I think, on one of the sheets, the kind of essential character of the kind of relationship that suggests the kind of moving from pastoral conversation to pastoral dialogue. That's how I would describe it. Pastoral conversation takes place everywhere in the community. I mean, it's one of the joys and frustrations of being a pastor. Whether you're standing in a line in a potluck or you're at a meeting, some kind of committee meeting, there's always pastoral care in one sense going on, and you're having all these conversations, and they're really critical. And nobody takes this lightly. This is how you nurture relationship in the everyday, regular interchange. And Capps, who's this really brilliant guy, says the most important thing about pastoral conversation is that it be warm and genuine. But then there are these times when, in particular settings, the conversation changes and we turn to the other person and we see them for who they are, and we are fully present. We're not in line. We're not on our way someplace, and we meet. This is the way Martin Buber writes about this. It's in some strong male language, and so I'm going to kind of reword it a bit. But this is the heart of the relationship of dialogue or of genuine relation. People wish to be confirmed in our being by another, and wish to have a presence in the being of another. The human person needs confirmation because people as people need it. An animal doesn't need it to be confirmed, for it is what it is unquestionably. It is different with a person, sent forth from the natural domain of species into the hazard of solitary category, surrounded by the air of chaos which came into being with him. Secretly and bashfully we watch, listen for a yes, which allows us to be, and which can come to us only from one person to another. It is from one person to another that the heavenly bread of self-being is passed. Now we're back with Oglesby's sense of being. So we have doing and knowing, and now we have being. How do you heal being? The disruption, the fragmentation of being itself. We do it by being present, by listening, by welcoming the person in and confirming them in who they are. That's the only way. That's why what we do, even when I wonder, what am I doing here? I mean, if I can just do that, that's not a just. That's not, I'm only just here. That's it. Really. And so you see there, being fully present, making the other present, obedient listening, affirming and confirming, imagining what it's like to be the other, withholding nothing, surrendering trustingly, and being willing to change. This is a rough part for me. But if I'm going to be open to the other person, usually or often that person is asking me to go to a place I would rather not go to. And if I do not want to go there, I'll find a way to avoid it. I had someone come was in unbelievable grief at the loss of his spouse. And his description of the life was just amazing. And I found myself so close to the experience of what it would be like not to have Susan. I just didn't want to hear it. I couldn't separate myself from it. But I had to do it in order to be able to listen, you know what I'm saying? So now what do I have to look at? What part of that do I need to see? And not bring it to him. You know, my job is now to bring what's elicited in me to some place so that I can talk about it. That's so critical. Because Henry Nouwen used to talk about this all the time. You know, ministry is so sneaky, is that pretty soon we end up needing them more than they need us. And we think we're being good. Because they love it. And we love it. Aren't I good? You know. But the sense of flow, I'm here for you, I'm going to be open to you, is going to cause us to go to those places where we're going to have to do some change. And by golly, if I'm going to read the text with the kind of boldness that I'm asking them to read, I got to be willing to be opened up by that text too. Might be just that God is addressing me there too. If I feel that I have to be fixed, I don't mean fixed, you know what I mean? Static. I can't do this work. And I don't think I can read the Bible. Oh, am I making sense? Is this making sense? Okay, let's do a case. This is from Deuteronomy 30. You have it in your handout. And what I'd like to do is kind of ask out of the blue if Tammy, would you come up and help me with, just take a chair, help me with this? Yes.
Okay. No hard words in here.
This person that I'm presenting, and I'm suggesting that this may be it's a kind of a way of thinking about of doing this work in which we're like reading a text. You read a while, you kind of talk with each other, and then you step back and wonder about it, and then you go back into the reading, and then you take something out and you wonder about it. I'm trying to do this during the course of a session, and then afterwards when I'm writing it up. There's nothing more important, I think, than reflecting on what we're doing. And again, Nouwen says, in some ways, if we're not writing up some of our cases, we're not doing our work. There's something about writing it. So this is a fellow whose name is Bruce, who is 33, was 33. His parents both alive. His father was an active Christian pastor. He came to me for pastoral care because his marriage was falling apart. Married about 7 years, which according to Jung is about the time when marriages fall apart. and for the kinds of reasons that were happening to him. She was a gregarious and emotional and passionate person. He was Midwestern and stoic and quiet and unbelievably stable. So you can imagine, just if we look at the dynamics of that, as what so often happens. She's kind of all over the place, and she's kind of in some sense projecting out some need for some stability. And he's very much like this, and he finds this passionate woman who really wants him, and it's like, oh, good, you know. And they kind of hire each other to be what each other expects. That's how it works. And then at some point, Jung says, the projection that we put on the other person begins to fall. And we begin to see the person as who they really are. And it's like, look who I married. I didn't know. This is not what I expected. I thought you, this is 100 variations of this. And of course, in this dance of intimacy, which is so critical, she was pursuing him emotionally. And the more she pursued him, the more he withdrew. This is the dance. I pursue, I withdraw. I pursue a little more, I withdraw a little more. I intensify it, now I'm really withdrawing because I can't handle all this emotion. I don't know what to do with it. Okay, I give up. What do you mean you give up? And so this goes back back and forth and back and forth. And Bruce, as I'm calling him, that's not his name, they come to some counseling and care. And she, of course, is complaining, and he's just at a loss. So often that kind of couples work doesn't work so well because she can engage me pretty well. I mean, I know how to do that. And then he's not, so he often feels like I'm aligning with her. We're all trying to get him to do something. Come on, John, come on, Peter, come on, Bruce. You can do this, you can do this. And at one point, she draws the line and says, I'm exasperated, I want a 3-month separation. And for people like this, that's like a real ultimatum. I mean, this is like abandonment. And he's caught with, he's a good man, he's a really good man, good heart. What have I done wrong? Isn't this who I am? Why can't she accept me for who I am? What does she want me to do? I don't think I can do it. So I began to see him then individually. She dropped out. And I don't always do this, but sometimes I do. And so we continued on. And I tried to support ways and think ways and help him, realize, encourage him to do what it is that I really could see that was in him to do. I wasn't getting anywhere. So it comes to this point where I start thinking, because he has this background, if we could read a text. And he says, okay. So the text I chose was from Deuteronomy 30. So this is kind of how it played out. I have him read this text. Do you have the sheet with you? Surely this commandment that I'm commanding you today is not too hard for you, nor is it too far away. It's not in heaven that you should say, who will go up to heaven for us and get it for us so that we may hear it and observe it. Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who will cross to the other side of the sea for us and get it so that we may hear it and observe it. No, the word is very near to you. It's in your mouth and in your heart for you to observe. Let's just get grounded here in a moment for the context of this text. Do you remember it? These are in the last words of Moses. The children of Israel had been in the desert for 40 years. They'd come to the river the first time and were afraid to cross it because somebody came back and said, there's giants over there. They're going to kill us. So Yahweh says, okay, let's go back in the wilderness for 40 years. Now they're back at the river. And the same issue, are we going to cross it? And just as they are getting ready to cross it, they discover that Moses isn't going to cross with them. He's been forbidden, which is another story. So you can imagine now he's giving them the last words to a people that has been with him all this time and has been following his lead. And now he says, I'm not going to be there. So what's the pastoral thing from him? What is the pastoral gift that he offers to this people who are scared and frightened and uncertain? What do you hear in these words?
The word.
Pardon me?
He leaves the word.
He leaves, the word is here. It's empowerment. Of course it's empowerment. Yeah. And it isn't fake. You can do this. What is he saying?
You have what you need.
You have what you need. This is such an important pastoral statement. You are enough, Brene Brown would say in her work on shame. You are enough. You have enough. You have what you need now to do this. This word is in you. Now, the question is, not do you trust me, but do you trust you? Faith is always a movement that goes from what sometimes is called bright faith to confidence, confides, faith with. And so when confidence in the biblical sense is built on our experience of life, in which our faith becomes our own. Can't happen any other way. Can't take somebody else's faith and live it. It has to be our own. That's the strangeness and the beauty of our tradition. How does it become our own? Well, through sometimes 40 years of eating manna and not having water and not knowing where, So can you trust that? Can you trust this now, that what you need is in yourself, including the I will be with you? So here I am with Bruce. We just read this text, and he reads it like, of course we all read it, like we're reading a newspaper. So I ask him, and you're going to be Bruce, okay?
Okay.
Bruce, I'd like you to read again, hearing the words spoken to yourself, as if the speaker means you. In this situation of your life, in this very moment of this session, you asked me at the beginning of the session, how can I do this? I don't know how or what to do. This voice is addressing your question. So Bruce reads it again. This time he reads it much more kind of personally. It's not so rote. It's still pretty reserved. It's okay. So I start. What do you hear in these words?
I think for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear that I can't ask anyone to go get it for me. What I want is in me, and I need to go get it. I can't ask anybody else to go find it for me. I can't ask anyone to go up to heaven or across the sea.
It's interesting to me that you use the word can't, because the word can't isn't in the text. But your response is so strong, it feels very real to you. What does can't mean to you in this moment? See where I don't want to change his reading, I'm just interested in how did he get this word in there? So I reflect. My hurried response to his use can't may have been preemptive. I interpreted what he meant by can't before he told me. I want to help Bruce learn that the text has a voice which responds to how and what we hear. Something like, Bruce, I didn't say you can't, So you go on.
I would have never noticed it, but I think when I say the word, it means that it is very hard for me to ask, or I don't even view it as an option to ask anybody for help. So for me to say that I can't ask anybody to find it for me I could easily have said, no one else could find it for me. I have to find it myself, but I choose not to include anyone else.
Because you have to do this by yourself? I'm missing something. Where did I miss it? Sorry. Oh yeah. No one else could find this for you because...
It's in me.
But you don't know that. You don't know this, Bruce, do you? You don't know that that's where it is. Now Bruce begins to tear up. When Bruce responded to me, this is my reflection, saying to himself, it's in me, I felt he's trying to give me the correct answer. This is often the case in studying, working with the text. What's the right answer? Here's the right answer, Pastor. It's typical of our early sessions. I wondered if, with the text included in our conversation, he was transferring to me the authority of one who knows. You get that sense? I decided to be direct and to trust that he was hearing something very challenging from the passage, something he wanted to believe. I say, I see your tears once more.
I don't even know what the feeling is. When you say that it's in me, I don't know. It makes me feel good because I never believed that it was...
He starts to cry.
Twice in one session.
Are these the same tears as before?
No. This time it's different.
Can you describe the feeling?
It's like someone has faith in me. Someone thinks I have it in me. And it feels really good.
And silence.
It's just really weird for me because I can't believe I haven't thought about my parents. You know what I mean? I can't even believe I haven't felt that way with Amy.
His wife.
It makes me think that even she doesn't believe it. I don't know. It makes me think that nobody believes in me except you right now, and that I have it in me.
Yes, Bruce, I do believe in you. So he starts to cry again. And then he looks differently at me than I've ever kind of seen. And I really see him. Before I saw this inadequate man, not so much by judgment that I felt he was inadequate, but I felt his inadequacy. It was an inadequacy that was in the room. In this brief moment, we meet as a kind of I-thou, two persons. I believe in you. You, the you who's in this chair. So his tears express that he felt, as I read earlier, that he had now been confirmed. Confirmed, in a sense, by me, just by my acceptance. I've been saying for sessions after sessions, it's in you, Bruce. It's in you, Bruce. But the text addresses him in such a way as not to trigger his resistance. That makes sense? And I think that's grace. And the power, the disclosive power of the text. It's possible, text present now makes it possible for us to be partners. Because I'm not the one in authority. I'm reading this with him. Okay. You believe that Amy doesn't think you have it in you to do this?
I don't know if I want to go that far. Because I almost feel that what I want to say is that I don't want to believe that they believe it in me. I think she does believe that I have it in me, but I have no idea how to find it, and I've never shown it to her. But I feel like she knows it's there, but she doesn't know how to get to it, or get to me, or show it. And I don't know what I need to do to find it.
But here the word can't comes up again for me. I'm not certain she can do it for you. Isn't that the struggle you both have been in for some time? You want Amy to do something, and she's run out of ideas and suggestions, and now she actually is separated from you, hoping, you say, that you will do something. It's like she left you alone. Maybe like the people of Israel who feel abandoned and are wondering what to do with Moses, gone now. So you speak tonight as if you're in a wilderness without direction and without a guide. So I say, let's read this again. This time I will read it, and I want you to listen to the words that are spoken. Surely this commandment, and I pause, I stop. Bruce, it occurs to me that this may be a strange word in the context of our reading, even though you're coming tonight with the question, what do I have to do and how do I do it? That sounds like you feel this thing is like a command, as if there isn't any option for you.
I have to do it in order to get Amy back.
Is Amy the one doing the commanding?
I like to think it's something I have to do for myself.
That sounds a little like both, but either way tonight, it's an obligation which you're accepting as your own. You heard from the text that what you need is already in you, in your heart and mouth. Knowing that changes things. You felt the lift in your spirit through your tears, and I could feel it because you became more present.
I could probably substitute the words I would use, like what book you will read, so that you will hear it and observe it. What activity will you do that you'll hear it in and observe it? None of them. Do we flip?
Where's it?
I think we flip.
Yeah, right. You can do them, that's fine, but it's not going to bring you any closer to what's in here. Let me go back to that. So I'm connected with that. I was too lost in where the next sheet was. Sorry. Oh, it is really are at the end, aren't we?
What's that?
Are we at the end of that?
Yep.
Okay. So let's go back to PC 12, okay?
Okay.
Is Amy the one doing the commanding?
I like to think it's something I have to do for myself.
Sounds a little like both, but either way tonight it's an obligation which you're accepting as your own. You heard from the text that what you need is already in you, in your heart and mouth. Knowing that changes things. You felt the lift in your spirit through your tears, and I could feel it because you became more present.
I could probably substitute the words I would use, like what book you will read, so that you will hear it and observe it. What activity will you do that you'll hear it and observe it? None of them.
Right.
You can do them, that's fine, but it's not going to bring you any closer to what's in here.
I think that's right, Bruce. It's time to cross the river. So, thank you. So what are you hearing in this discourse or this dialogue that I'm trying to have with him? Or how did I use the text? You know, this is a collaboration. I could use your critique too. Process.
It sounds like it was really having him to personalize the text internally to be able to relate to it as it applies to the situation.
I think Bruce did a great job in explaining why we don't want to listen and why we don't want to believe it. Because if it is in us to do, then what? We don't have an excuse, right? Not to do it. You know
what I found really important is that you're not lifting a text, maybe proof text, something. You put it into the story that the text is about, so that then Bruce can put it into his story.
Yeah.
So using the Bible should not be done just lifting a verse.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, proof texting isn't helpful. That's a style of counseling that sometimes is used in the, quote, moral way of using it, telling people what they should think or what they should do. But in this way that I'm suggesting, it's a real give and take. But you notice here that I want to bring Bruce back to the text. Because as we've talked about, you can say a lot. There's a lot of room for us in our imagination, our experience in this text. But it's also a text. So when I hear for the word can't, I wonder, how did he put that in there? How do we do that? How do we put those words in there that aren't there and yet, doggone it, they're there? You know, that's kind of a style of reading too. So when you really pay attention and say, well, let's look at this verse. You know, I forget your name. She came up afterwards in the break and noticed at the end of the Jacob story, it's if you will, bring me back. If you will, bring me back. If you'll do this, if you'll do this. You shall be my God, and I shall tithe to you, kind of. And she wondered, in just that word, what's the difference between will and shall? God doesn't say shall, he uses will. And she wonders, you over there, wondered, that's kind of like highfalutin speech. It's like almost, who do you think you are, you shall? You're using this word, kind of attitude is shall. You know, that's what I mean about how beautiful and carefully these texts are written so that we can observe it in just this slight, and bring it back into the session. I see you using this word. That's an interesting word. I don't see it in the text. Well, of course, there's no doubt in my mind that what Bruce is struggling with is exactly what the people of Israel were struggling with. We can't do this. There's no way we can do this without you. And you notice that Moses does this brilliant thing, and there's all sorts of great midrash behind it. He doesn't say to the people of Israel, I'm not going over with you, but you don't have to worry because you got Joshua. There's another leader, but that's not what they need in order to do this thing. And that's true. That's kind of what Bruce is saying. I'm going to the books. I'm reading the self-help books. I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to get all this information from out here. Anything that I can do that other than step into my life and say, here I am. Not in the way that Amy wants him, but in the fullness of his life. And I'm saying to him, because I believe this, that's in him to do. But he needs to know that it's in him to do. Not in some other way, but his way. You know, Buber says, the elemental question of human life is, how shall I live my life out of the true nature of my being? That's part of our job. Who are you? How can I help you? What can I do to bear your burden, listen to you, so that you can become fully yourself? Not what I think you should be, but you. And so that excited that in Bruce. I mean, we went on and read some other texts, and he became actually quite bold. The next text we read, which we won't have time to do, is Jonathan the warrior. I mean, he goes to battle. He becomes he gets out there and he does some hard work around this. So it's this interplay. It's the reading like we were doing, with Jacob. It's noticing, yeah.
It seems like, choosing the right text for the particular person is pretty important. In what way is this not what you did here, not proof texting? You had a text in mind that you thought might speak into a situation. I'm imagining myself choosing a really wrong text for a situation. Maybe that's where I have to trust my pastoral authority. But that seems like an important piece of it.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, the dynamic choice of a text would be to address a particular situation. Now, there might be, so to speak, something disclosed in it that we were unaware of, but the dynamic works. Why isn't that proof text? Because I'm not proving something by using a text. I mean, the text is opening him up and me up to deepen our dialogue. That's the difference between the proof text, I would say. Now, then let me say this. There is no one text that's right or wrong. And like all care, we try something, and if it doesn't work, we say, we do something else. This is also true with the using of the text. We were talking about this in our SEM class. And it's why it's so important to have colleagues, and then to kind of reflect on it. Sometimes I'll say, I'm working with someone, I'm thinking of a text, but it can't come to mind. Do you have anything come to you, And sometimes I'll do it with the person himself. There is no right text. I just have this hunch that whatever text we read, there's something in it. And often it's a surprise. Sometimes it seems like it's not right, and I withdraw.
Sometimes I'll be with a patient and a text will keep coming to mind, and I'll think to myself, this has absolutely nothing to do with but it keeps coming. And so I say, could this have anything to do with it? And it's usually right. I think the Holy Spirit can give us texts.
Yeah, Ed Wimberly, who I told you earlier, writes this book on using Scripture in pastoral care and counseling. He's in the African American community. He talks about this as contagion. It's like you catch something. Something catches you up. And how to describe it as spirit or intuition, it just comes, And I think it's perfectly wonderful to be bold and say, I don't know why I'm coming up with this, but I wonder if it works. You try it out. You don't insist on it. Buber's all the time talking about, and this is a proof texting, the difference between imposing and unfolding. I'm not imposing the story. I want us to unfold it together. And of course, the more acquainted we are with these stories, the more available they are to our imagination as a resource, when we need them. We had this moment in class yesterday with the SEM students where we were trying to find another text. There was somebody, we were doing a verbatim from another resource, and we weren't kind of happy with the text, so we started to look. So how would you do this? We were sitting there, all of us, kind of thumbing through the Bible, and just kind of trying to get our, finally one or two came, and that's kind of how it happens too, If I had the kind of memory that a scribe had, who, and increasingly in my life, there's so many files deleted that I need either help or I need to reference myself. And then I try to keep notes and some understanding of the surprising way in which the text worked. You notice also how I'm kind of reflecting back. And so I'm noticing that as we're reading. Part of the reading is we're reading the text together. We're reading with each other. The text is reading him. The text is reading me, by the way. But I'm the helper. So I might be aware of what the text is doing in me, but I'm primarily aware of what's going on there. So that's why I want to reflect it back. Yeah.
In this scenario, looking at it as a case study, what was the meaning of the tears? You seem to really address his tears, where sometimes as a counselor we want to do something to help them stop crying.
Oh, no, I never do. Particularly men. I mean, if men are weeping, that's a really, here's a guy who's reserved.
So this was
His wife would die for some tears. I think she's felt, here's the first time I saw tears. I feel so bad about myself. I am so inadequate. This is how I feel. I feel like this right here with you. Why should I come to counseling and feel this badly with you? And this is how I feel with Amy. And so men who are often like this look pitiful, are pitiful, and think that should evoke from their spouses compassion. But it often evokes anger. Why is it about you? Why is it always how bad you feel? You feel bad because I feel bad. Why is it about you? You know what I'm saying? So I noticed that. And then the next time, when he seems to get this sense of, there's something in me, this is the empowerment. I could feel him lift, and he began to weep, not pathetically, as if he was, pathetic, but as he just got something. He just touched something in him that he's wanted to touch and didn't know how to touch. The tears are so powerful in expression and so often misunderstood.
Yeah, I like how you ask something that you don't know. Are these the same tears as before? Can you describe this feeling? That's in our spiritual direction a lot.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, thank you. That I don't know. I'm not always that aware, but in this work, we have to be prepared under any situation to not know. I don't know. My job isn't to tell you what you're feeling. My job is to ask. It's easy to cross that line. Because then when we're helpless and we don't know what to do, then we have something to say that seems important. But it usually is a distraction. It's usually trying to rescue us.
Those tears are like Bruce saying, God is here. Didn't know it.
This was a moment I'm going to carry with me back to Minnesota, into my work. I mean, look how we started with Jacob on the run. I gave you a text with Bruce and Deuteronomy and the last words of Moses. And Lance says, oh, that reminds me of the text we were just reading. When this can happen, both in a group, if it's a conventicle, or when we begin to develop a way of dialogue with the text with a person or a family or a couple, and then they come back and say, this reminded me of the text we were reading last week or 2 weeks ago, then you know the dialogue is really alive. That they've taken in a text that now is informing them and informing their relationship, that's now in their imagination. That was great. I missed that. Another reason why collaboration is so absolutely critical. We cannot, the more eyes and ears are in this work, the better. Thank you. And thank you. That's a wonderful morning for me. And the next time we meet, we'll give ourselves an hour for a good break. I think that's what it is. And then we come back. I want to take one more text, this time from the Gospel. And then I want to go to the use of Psalms in two different narratives of grief. Okay? Yeah.
Just, if you can, how do things go with Bruce after that? Is there a good ending to the story, or it's still ongoing? Or?
Depends on the ending. Well, what happened is he really opened up into his life. He really bodied forth, as we say. It turns out, as sometimes happens, that's not really what his wife wanted. She didn't know what to do with the fullness of his life without being critical also that he wasn't there. So when he was really there, this of course was really painful for him, but they ended up divorcing. You know, it doesn't always, I mean, it ends the way it ends. It doesn't always end the way I want it to end or would like it to have ended, but I think what happened was that he found himself, you know, and then the question is, could you know, it's like the marriage, you know, at some point we have to stand and look at each other and say, do I still choose you? Knowing now what I know, having been through what I've been through. This is the crucible, we hope, that is strong enough that allows us to get through the misery. And we're not going to change each other, and yet we can change. Now, in this change, do we look at each other and say yes? And not everybody does.
Marriage is a people-grown machine, so
it really is.
Grow together, or
it's just absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why, you know, there's so much at stake. You know, one could say on the one hand, her drawing the line forced him to do the thing that he always needed to do, but wouldn't have done until somebody had forced him to. It's like you're up against the river now, people. You want to go back into the wilderness, you're going to cross. This is it. If you're going to cross, this is what you need to know. It's in you. And so the mystery of how this works, I don't know. I just bear witness to that it's a mystery. You know. Yeah. Okay. Have a good lunch.